Some kitchens cook with fire. This one cooks with truth, and it has decided against all sense that he is unworthy of warmth, unless she can teach him otherwise. Our story begins now. The door to Master Fenwick's kitchen did not have a handle. It had a brass knocker shaped like a ladle, and when Hermione Granger lifted it, the metal was warm. Not sun-warm, but the warmth of something that had been held. She let it fall once. The sound that came back was not a knock. It was a sigh, low and pleased, as though the room beyond had been waiting all morning for exactly her. The door swung inward on its own. She had read the pamphlet 4 times on the train down from the ministry's reintegration office. Domestic enchantment for the post-bellum witch and wizard. Instructor E. Fenwick. Wands permitted but irrelevant. That last line had snagged in her like a burr. Everything in her life since the war had been wands and words, and the relentless effort of proving she still belonged in a world she'd nearly died for. The idea of a place where her wand meant nothing had drawn her here the way cold draws a hand to fire. The kitchen smelled of 3 things at once: scorched sugar, rosemary, and underneath both, the sharp mineral tang of a storm about to break, though the ceiling showed only blackened beams and a long row of copper pans hung from hooks like sleeping bats. "You feel it," said a voice. "Good. The ones who don't, I send home." Master Eulalie Fenwick was small and round and entirely silver-haired, with flour on her cheek and eyes the precise grey-green of a kettle left too long on the boil. She did not offer a hand. She studied Hermione the way a cat studies a doorway, deciding whether it leads somewhere worth going. "Granger," Fenwick said. "The clever one. They warned me about you." She did not say who they were. "Cleverness is a liability in here, child. The oven doesn't care what you know. It cares what you mean." She turned away. "Find a station. We're 7 today. We'll be 5 by Thursday." There were 6 long oak tables, each with its own cold hearth, its own block of knives, its own single suspended pan. Hermione chose the one nearest the window, where pale October light fell through old glass thick as honey. The moment she set her hand on the table's edge, the knives in the block beside her gave a faint, bright shiver, a sound like a wineglass touched with a fingernail, and turned, very slightly, blades toward her. Not threatening. Greeting. She drew her hand back. Her pulse, absurdly, had quickened. The others filed in. A nervous Hufflepuff boy she half recognized. A pair of girls who'd been a year below her. An old man who must have come for reasons of his own. And then, last, framed in the doorway with the corridors dark behind him, Draco Malfoy. He had not knocked, she realized. The door had simply opened the way it had for her. But where it had sighed for her, it gave him nothing. He stepped over the threshold into a silence so total that the copper pans seemed to hold their breath. He looked thinner than the boy in her memory, and older than 2 years could account for. The expensive line of his coat couldn't disguise the wariness in how he carried himself, the way a man carries himself through a town that has decided about him. His gaze swept the room and found her, and something flinched behind his eyes before the old contempt slid down over it like a portcullis. "Granger," he said. The word was flat. A stone dropped down a well, listening for the splash. Malfoy. She gave him nothing back. It cost her more than it should have. Fenwick clapped her flowery hands once. "Pairs," she announced. "This kitchen does not suffer the lone genius. It suffers partnership, or it suffers no one." Her kettle-green eyes moved over them and landed, with the inevitability of a dropped plate finding the floor, on the two who least wanted it. You and you, the clever one and the quiet one, together. "No," Draco said. "Master Fenwick," Hermione started. "The kitchen has already decided," the old woman said, unbothered, turning to her hearth. "It decided the moment he walked in. You'll see why." And they did see why, almost at once. Fenwick set them their first task. The simplest thing, she said. The first thing any cook learns. To warm butter without burning it. To feel the moment fat turns from solid to liquid gold. To praise the pan for its patience. "It listens," she told them, the way one might mention that a horse bites. "It always listens." Hermione went to the pan suspended above their shared hearth and lifted it down. It came to her hand light as a held breath. The copper was old, beaten by 1,000 hands before hers, the inside worn to a soft pewter sheen, and when her fingers closed around the iron handle, a warmth bloomed up through her palm. Gentle, immediate, like a dog leaning its weight against your leg. The hearth beneath caught flame without a spark. The butter she dropped in slid into a slow golden melt, fragrant, perfect, the foam settling like the surface of a pond going still. "Show off," Draco muttered, but there was no heat in it. There was something closer to bewilderment. "Your turn," she said, and held the pan out to him. He took it. The change was instant and absolute. The warmth fled the metal as though a window had been thrown open onto January. The handle went cold and then colder, a deep, aching chill that she could feel radiating off it from a foot away. The flames in the hearth guttered low and sullen and blue. And the pan. There was no other word for what it did. The pan recoiled. The handle twisted in his grip like a live thing trying to escape, and a thin curl of acrid smoke rose from the butter as it scorched instantly to bitter black, though the fire beneath had nearly died. Draco's knuckles went white around the iron. A muscle leapt in his jaw. He did not let go. "Set it down," Hermione said, and she heard her own voice come out low and oddly urgent. "Malfoy, set it down before it—" The pan bucked. There was no other word. It twisted hard, the hot black butter sluicing toward his wrist, and he dropped it with a clatter that rang through the kitchen like a struck bell. It hit the table edge, rolled, and came to rest at Hermione's feet. And the moment it touched the floor near her, the copper warmed again, visibly, the dull surface brightening to a rosy gold, smug as a cat returned to a favourite lap. The whole kitchen seemed to exhale. One of the year-below girls smothered a laugh behind her hand. Draco stood very still. The blue flames of his dead hearth threw a cold light up the side of his face, and across the back of his left hand, a long red welt was already rising where a fleck of scorched butter had caught him. He did not look at it. He looked at the pan, gleaming and content at his enemy's feet, and Hermione watched a humiliation so complete move through him that for one disloyal instant she pitied him with her whole chest. Then he saw her watching, and the portcullis slammed down again. "Marvellous," he said, voice silk-smooth and dead. "It likes you. How fitting. Everything likes you." "It's not personal," she said, which was a lie, and they both knew it. because in this room, nothing was anything but personal. Fenwick had drifted over to stand behind them, hands folded into her apron, watching the cold hearth with an expression Hermione couldn't read. "Ah," she said softly. "Yes, there it is." She bent and retrieved the pan from the floor, and in her hands it sat docile and bright. "This one," she said to Draco, holding it up, "is the proudest thing in my kitchen. Older than me. It has cooked for kings and beggars, and it has never once been fooled. It does not respond to your wand. It does not respond to your name, which I imagine is a novelty for you. It responds only to what you carry in here." She tapped the welted copper over where a heart would be, if a pan had one. "And it does not like what you carry." "How thrilling," Draco said. "I've been judged unfit by a cooking implement. Add it to the list." "You misunderstand me," Fenwick said, and there was no cruelty in her voice, which somehow made it worse. "You cannot pass my course without this pan's blessing. Every student leaves having cooked one true thing in it. That is the examination. That is the only examination." She set the copper gently back on its hook above his ruined fire, where it hung gleaming and untouchable. "You have until midwinter to make this pan willing to be held by you. I have never seen it take to anyone faster than your partner. I have never seen it loathe anyone the way it loathes you." She smiled, not unkindly. "I find that interesting. The kitchen finds it interesting. You should too." She moved off to torment the Hufflepuff, whose soup had begun audibly to weep. Draco stared at the pan. Hermione stared at Draco. The welt on his hand had darkened to an angry line, and she noticed. She couldn't help noticing. She catalogued everything. It was the curse of her, that he held that hand slightly behind him, out of her sight, the way a child hides a thing it's ashamed of. "You should put cold water on that," she said. "I should put a great many things in a great many places," he said. "Your concern is touching and unwanted. I don't need your help, Granger." "No," she agreed. "But the pan does, apparently. And the pan's the only one whose opinion counts in here." She bent and picked up the dishcloth that had fallen with the clatter and folded it once, twice, her hands wanting something to do. "You can't charm it. You can't outthink it. You can't pay it. You can't threaten it. There is, as far as I can tell, exactly one person in this room it might listen to about you." She set the folded cloth down on the table between them, precisely, squaring its edges, and only when it was perfectly aligned did she trust herself to meet his eyes. "And she's standing right here, so you can keep telling me you don't need help. Or you can stop wasting the daylight we have left and let me try." For a long moment, the only sound was the storm tang in the air and the soft, contented hiss of every flame in the kitchen save his. Draco Malfoy looked at her. Really looked, the contempt thinning for just a heartbeat to show the raw, bewildered fear underneath. The look of a man who has lost the only weapons he ever learned to use. And Hermione felt the floor of the afternoon shift beneath her, quiet and total, like the moment butter turns to gold. Then he reached up, took the cold pan down from its hook a second time, and held it out to her across the table without a single word. The pan hung between them in the cold air, and Hermione did not take it. She let it stay there in his outstretched hand, copper gone dull and treacherous the instant his skin touched it, the welt on the back of that same hand still raw, and she made him hold the silence long enough to understand that the offer he was making cost something, that she saw the cost, that she was not going to pretend for either of their sakes that this was a small thing. "Put it back on the hook," she said at last. "I'm not going to take it from you so you can tell yourself you handed it over." His arm did not waver, but a flicker crossed his face. "You said you'd try." "I will, but not like this. Not with you passing me the problem like a soiled plate and folding your arms to watch me fail." She came around the end of the table. Slowly, the worn flagstones cooled through the thin soles of her shoes, and she stopped close enough that she could smell him under the rosemary and the scorch. Wool and something colder, the clean mineral smell of a person who scrubs themselves too hard. "If I help you, you do the work. You hold it. You burn your hand 100 times. I'm not earning this for you, Malfoy. I can't. Even if I wanted to, the kitchen won't let me. Fenwick said it herself. The examination is yours. So put it back, and tomorrow you come early, and we start." For a moment, she thought he'd throw the pan at the wall. The tendons in his wrist stood out. Then, with a control so deliberate it was its own kind of violence, he turned and set the copper back on its iron hook above the dead hearth, exactly where it had hung, and the metal brightened the instant his fingers left it, content as a thing relieved of a burden. He looked at the gleaming, smug curve of it. "It enjoys this," he said. "I didn't know an object could enjoy." "Most of them can't," Hermione said. "This kitchen is different. Fenwick built it to feel. That's the whole point. That's what makes it work, and what makes it impossible to cheat." She hesitated. Then, because honesty seemed the only currency this room would accept. "I think that's why I came here. Everywhere else, I'm only ever as good as what I can prove. Here, it doesn't care what I can prove." She had not meant to say it. The words were out before she'd vetted them, and she felt the old reflexive need to take them back, to straighten them, to make them less true. And instead, she let them lie there between her and Draco Malfoy, of all the people in the world, exposed as a nerve. He did not mock her for it. That, more than anything, was what told her he understood. He simply looked at her for a long beat, the cold blue light of his hearth shifting on the side of his face. And then he looked away, out the honeyed window where the October afternoon was going to ash, and said very quietly, "No, it doesn't care what you can prove. It only cares what you are, which is a great deal worse for some of us." The bell on Fenwick's mantle, a small thing of beaten tin that no one had touched, rang once by itself to mark the end of the lesson. He came early the next morning. So did she. The kitchen at that hour was a different creature. The storm smell faint, the copper pans cold on their hooks, the long oak tables silvered with the kind of light that comes before the sun clears the hills. Fenwick was nowhere. A single candle burned on the mantel beside the tin bell, though no one had lit it, and its small flame leaned toward Hermione as she passed, the way a flower leans, and stood straight again when Draco followed. "Even the candle," he said. "Marvelous. Stop noticing it." She set her bag down. "You walk in here counting the ways this place hates you, and the place feels you counting. That's the trap. Watch." She crossed to the hearth and laid her hand flat on the cold stone of it, and beneath her palm a low warmth woke and spread, and a single tongue of flame climbed up out of the dead ash with a soft sound like a sigh. I'm not doing anything. I'm not casting. I'm just not afraid of it. It can tell. Draco watched the flame burn steady and gold under her hand, and the muscle in his jaw worked. And what am I meant to do with that? Simply decide not to be afraid? Fear isn't a coat, Granger. You don't take it off because the weather turns. It was, she thought, the most genuine thing he had ever said to her. There was no drawl in it, no performance, only a fact stated plainly by a man who had clearly worn a great deal of fear for a very long time and knew exactly how it was stitched on. No, she said, you don't, but you can learn to hold it without letting it hold the pan. Come here. He came. The space between them was suddenly very small and very alive, the cold morning air seeming to thicken around them, a static gathering she could feel against the fine hairs of her arms. She reached up and lifted the pan from its hook. It warmed for her instantly, a low rosy gleam, and she did not hand it to him. She held it level between them, both her hands on the copper bowl of it, the iron handle pointing toward his chest. Put your hands over mine, she said. He went still. What? Over mine. On the handle. Don't take it from me. Just rest your hands over mine, so it's holding both of us at once. So it can't tell where you end and I begin. She kept her voice even with an effort. It trusts me. If we touch it together, maybe it'll trust the part of you that's touching the part of me it trusts. It's worth one try. He looked at her hands on the warm copper. He looked at her face. Whatever he found there made him swallow. And then, slowly, as if he expected the metal to scald him at any instant, Draco Malfoy laid his hands over Hermione Granger's. His palms were cold. Of course they were. The kitchen had never let them be anything else. But where his skin covered the backs of her hands, the cold met her warmth, and the two could not quite reconcile. A tactile friction running up through her wrists, and she felt the welt on his hand against her knuckle, the raised raw line of yesterday's burn, and something in her chest pulled tight as a wire wound one turned too far. The pan held warm. For 3 seconds, 4, the copper stayed rosy and content under their stacked hands, the handle steady, the morning holding its breath. And Hermione's heart leapt because it was working, because this was working. And then the warmth began to drain. Not all at once this time. Slowly, the way colour drains from her face. The copper dimmed beneath their fingers, the rosy gleam fading to dull pewter, and then to the grey of cold ash, and a chill rose up through the metal so sharp that she gasped, and the handle gave a single hard shudder, like a horse shaking off a fly, and twisted itself out from under both their hands and clattered to the flagstones, where it rolled in a slow, contemptuous arc and came to rest, gleaming and warm again, against the toe of Hermione's shoe. They stood there, with their empty hands still stacked in the air between them, his over hers, suddenly with nothing to hold but each other. Neither of them moved. The candle on the mantel burned straight and tall. Somewhere above the hills, the sun crested at last and threw a long bar of gold across the flagstones, lighting the abandoned pan, lighting the place where their hands hung, joined over nothing, lighting the half-inch of cold morning air between his chest and her shoulder, where she had stepped in too close and forgotten to step back. Draco was looking down at her. She could feel it. She kept her own eyes fixed on their hands, on the welt, on the long pale fingers laid over her smaller ones, on the small impossible fact of his touch, because she did not entirely trust what her face would do if she looked up. "It held," he said. His voice had gone low and rough, scraped clean of every drawl. "For a moment, it held." "For a moment," she agreed. Her own voice was not quite steady. "Which means it can. It's not impossible. It's only—" She stopped because she did not know how to finish the sentence in a way that wasn't dangerous. "It's only that the moment you were truly there, the moment you stopped hiding behind me and let it feel all of you, it pulled away. That was the truth, and the truth would wound him, and she found, to her own great irritation, that she did not want to wound him this morning." "It's only what?" he asked. She drew her hands out from under his. She did it slowly, so it wouldn't seem like flinching, but the loss of warmth where his palms had been was immediate and absurd, and she folded her arms to keep her hands from reaching after the contact, and the gesture felt so transparent that her face went hot. "It's only difficult," she said. "Not impossible. There's a difference." She bent and retrieved the pan. It nestled into her hands like a contented animal, which, under the circumstances, she found almost unbearable, and she hung it back on its hook. "We'll try again tomorrow. Different approach. Stop letting it touch the fear, and we'll get nowhere. The fear's the truest thing about you in here. The pan goes straight for it, so we don't hide the fear." She turned to face him and made herself meet his eyes despite the heat in her face, because she would not be the one who looked away first. "We give it something truer." He stared at her. The morning light caught the grey of his eyes and turned them almost silver, and there was a question forming in them that she did not have an answer for, a question that had nothing to do with cookware. "And what?" Draco Malfoy said slowly. "Do you imagine is truer in me than the fear?" The candle on the mantel guttered, leaned hard toward the two of them as one, and burned suddenly, fiercely bright, bright enough that they both turned to look at it. And in that small, wild flaring of light, Hermione realized she had no answer for him, and that she had, without deciding to, already begun to want one. By the second week, she had a system, because she always had a system. Hermione arrived each morning with a small notebook bound in oxblood leather, and in it she had written in her precise upright hand everything she had observed about the kitchen's moods, that the knives sang highest just after dawn, that the oven sulked if approached too quickly, that the copper pan warmed half a degree more readily when there was real hunger in the room. She had columns. She had a theory of escalating exposure. She had, God help her, a plan, and she laid it out for Draco across the oak table with the candle leaning toward her and the morning thin and grey at the window. "Technique," she said, tapping the page. "If we can't change what the pan reads in you all at once, we change it in increments. We isolate the variables. You hold it for 1 second the first day, 2 the next. We build a tolerance the way you'd build a callus." She did not look up from the notebook, because looking up at him had begun to be a thing she had to brace for. "We approach it like a problem. Problems have solutions. I've never met one that didn't. Draco let her finish. He had learned over the past several mornings to let her finish, to wait out the cascade of her certainty the way one waits out weather. Then he said quietly, "It's not a problem, Granger. It's a person who happens to be made of copper." "It is not a person. It's an enchanted object that responds to emotional input. That's a system. Systems can be solved." "Yes, I heard you." He reached across the table and with one finger closed her notebook. Gently, but he closed it. "You keep saying that word, solved, as if a feeling were a sum you could carry, as if it would simply add up if you only kept careful enough columns." His grey eyes held hers, and there was no cruelty in them, only a strange, weary patience that unsettled her far more than cruelty would have. "You're the cleverest witch of our age. Everyone says so. They've said it so long you've forgotten it's a cage. You walk in here every morning and try to outthink the one thing in England that can't be outthought, and it watches you do it, and it loves you anyway. Because at least you mean it. At least your wanting is real, even when you bury it under columns." He took his finger off the notebook. "I don't have that problem. My wanting isn't real enough to bury." The candle flared. She looked at it and then at him, and found she had nothing in any of her columns to say. "Try it your way then," he said, before she could recover. "I'll hold it for 1 second. I'll build my callus. Let's see what your system makes of me." It made nothing of him. That was the morning's slow, humiliating revelation, and it humiliated her as much as him, because it was her method that failed. He held the pan for 1 second by her count, his face a mask of concentration, doing precisely as she instructed. "Don't grip it. Cradle it. Breathe. Think of something pleasant." And the copper went cold in exactly the same heartbeat it always did. And on the second day, he held it for 1 second again, and on the third, and there was no callus, no tolerance, no incremental anything. The pan did not warm to repetition. It could not be worn down. Every time he touched it, it judged him fresh, as though the morning before had never happened, as though forgiveness were not a thing that accrued. "It's not learning," Hermione said on the 4th morning, staring at her notebook, at the neat column of identical failures. That doesn't make sense. Everything learns. Repeated exposure always. There's always habituation. There's always." She heard her own voice climbing and could not stop it. "I don't understand. I've controlled for every variable. The time of day, the temperature, the order of operations, I changed the butter, Malfoy. I tested 3 different butters." "I know you did." "And it does the same thing every time, the exact same thing, as if it's reading from a script I can't see, and I can't find the rule. There has to be a rule. There is always a rule." Her hand had begun to shake very slightly where it rested on the page. She pressed it flat to stop it. The thing she could not say, the thing crawling up the back of her throat, was that for 2 years she had been holding herself together with rules, with systems, with the desperate architecture of a mind that refused to feel the war it had survived, because feeling it might bring the whole structure down, and that this stupid kitchen, this stupid pan, had found the one room in her she'd bricked over and was standing outside it, knocking. She straightened the corner of the notebook, squared it to the table edge, squared it again, though it had not moved. Draco watched her do it. He watched her hands, the small, frantic ritual of alignment, and something in his face changed. The patience deepening into something she had no name for, something that looked almost like recognition. "You can't solve it," he said, "because there's nothing to solve. It isn't reading your method, it's reading you. And right now, what it's reading is a woman who'd rather build 100 columns than admit she came to a cooking class because she's coming apart." He said it softly. He said it without triumph. He said it the way you'd point out to someone that their hands were bleeding and they hadn't noticed. It loves you, because underneath all the columns, the wanting is real. And it can't be tricked into loving you more by you pretending the columns are the wanting. That's the rule, Granger. That's the only rule. Feeling can't be faked, and it can't be filed. The kitchen had gone very quiet. The candle burned straight. Outside the honeyed glass, a fine rain had begun, the kind that doesn't fall so much as hang, beading the old window and bending the grey morning light into something underwater and slow. Hermione looked at him. Her eyes had gone hot and bright at the edges, and she hated it. Hated that he of all people had seen it. Hated more that he had named it so exactly and so kindly that the kindness was its own small, unbearable wound. "Don't," she said. Her voice came out scraped. "Don't you dare turn this around on me. You're the one the pan won't touch. You're the one who can't pass. I came here to help you." "Did you?" He was not unkind. That was the terrible thing. He was not unkind at all. "Or did you come here because it's the only place where being clever doesn't save you, and some part of you is so tired of being saved by it that you'd rather be in a room that doesn't care?" He leaned back. "I'm not turning anything around. I'm just the only person here who recognizes the shape of it. Takes one, Granger. I've spent my whole life with a perfect mask welded to my face. I know what it looks like from the inside when someone else's starts to slip." The rain hung at the window. Somewhere in the room, a knife sang one high, faint note and went still. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The space between them across the oak table had filled with something dense and charged, an atmospheric pressure she could feel in her chest, in the small bones of her wrists. She had spent 4 years and a war hating this person. She had a column for it somewhere. And now he sat across a candle from her in the grey underwater light and saw straight through to the cracked place she had shown no one. Not Harry, not Ron, not the kind, dull ministry counsellor with her clipboard, and her. And how does that make you feel, Miss Granger? And the sheer relief of being seen, of not having to perform her own wholeness for one single morning, was so enormous and so terrifying that she did the only thing she knew how to do when feeling threatened to drown her. She reached for the pan. She didn't decide to. Her hand simply went out, the way a hand goes out to a banister on a stair gone suddenly steep, and her fingers closed around the warm copper, and she lifted it down off its hook and held it against her chest like a shield, and the warmth of it bloomed up against her sternum, steady and unjudging and kind, the one kind thing in the room, and to her absolute horror, she felt her eyes spill over. Just 2. 2 tears, fast before she got them stopped. She turned her face to the window so he wouldn't see. He saw. She heard him stand, heard the scrape of the stool on flagstone. She braced for the drawl, for the cruelty, for the small, cold well that would let her hate him again and put everything back in its column where it belonged. It would have been a mercy. She willed him to be cruel. He wasn't. He crossed the small space behind her, and he did not touch her. She felt him not touch her, felt him stop a careful hand's width away, close enough that the warmth of him reached her through the cold morning, far enough that she could pretend, if she needed to, that it wasn't happening. And he said, low, near her ear, in a voice she had never once heard him use in 7 years of knowing him, "The columns aren't weakness, you know. They held you up when nothing else would. Don't let it tell you they were nothing." A breath, the rain at the glass. "But you can put one down, just one. In here, it's safe to put one down. That's what it's for." She stood with the warm pan crushed to her chest and the rain hanging silver at the window, and Draco Malfoy a hand's width behind her, saying the truest, gentlest thing anyone had said to her since the world ended. And she understood, with a clarity that frightened her more than any hex ever had, that she had been wrong about which of them needed saving in this room, and that the candle on the mantel had bent itself nearly horizontal toward the two of them, and was burning in the grey, wet hush, with a high white flame she could not look away from, and neither, she knew without turning, could he. It went wrong on a night that had no business going wrong. Fenwick had kept them late. The 5 who remained, the course winnowed exactly as she'd promised, for what she called a true fire, the first lesson taught after dark. "Daylight is for technique," she said, lighting the long row of wall sconces with a flick of one flowery finger, the flames waking in sequence down the stone like a held breath, let out slow. But food was made at night, in the dark, by the hearth, with the wolves outside. That's where it remembers what it's for. The kitchen at night was another country. The honeyed window had gone black and mirror bright, throwing the candle fire back doubled. The copper pans on their hooks burned with reflected flame. The air had thickened with wood smoke and the green smell of crushed herbs, and underneath it, the storm tang sharpened to something almost electric, ozone, the smell of the air after a hex is cast. They were to make a single dish in pairs in their pan, a simple braise. Onions caramelized to the color of old mahogany, wine, a long, slow surrender of tough meat to tender. Hermione started it. The pan warmed for her, the onions slid into their slow gold collapse, and for a while it was almost easy, the two of them shoulder to shoulder in the firelight, her stirring, him feeding the hearth, a rhythm between them that had built itself over a fortnight without either of them deciding to let it. Then it was his turn at the pan. It was always going to be his turn. That was the lesson. He took the handle from her, and the cold came down like a dropped portcullis, and the onions seized and stuck and began instantly to scorch, and Draco's knuckles whitened on the iron, and he did not let go, because he had learned not to let go, and the smoke rose bitter and black between them, and across the kitchen one of the year below girls said, not quietly enough, "Honestly, what did Fenwick expect? It's a Malfoy. Of course nothing decent will cook for him." And her companion laughed. It was a small thing. It was a thing he had surely heard 100 times in 2 years. But the firelight was low, and the hour was late, and the mask, Hermione saw, had thinned to almost nothing over the past fortnight of early mornings, and the small thing went straight through where the mask used to be. He set the pan down, carefully. That was what frightened her, the care. He set it down without a clatter, and he turned, and the firelight caught the left side of his face and the sleeve that covered his left arm, and he said, in a voice gone smooth and lethal and absolutely dead, "You're quite right. Tell me, which of your relatives did I personally murder? I'd like to apologize specifically. It seems only courteous since you've clearly itemized the bill." The girl went white. The kitchen went silent. Fenwick, by her own hearth, did not move, watching with her kettle-green eyes half-lidded, letting it happen, because in this room, everything that was true was allowed to surface. "Malfoy," Hermione said. He didn't hear her. He was somewhere else now, somewhere cold and far back behind his own eyes, and the words came out of him in a flat, terrible stream. "Go on. I'll save you the arithmetic. The answer is none, as it happens. I was 16 and a coward, and I did nothing useful in either direction, which is its own special category of contemptible. But it does spoil your story rather, doesn't it? The villain who couldn't even commit properly, just stood in the corner of his own house while..." His voice caught, just slightly, the first crack in the smooth, dead surface. "While. And then afterward they put my name on a list, and the list followed me everywhere, and now even the cookware has read it, so really you needn't have bothered saying it aloud. It's already common knowledge among the saucepans." He was shaking. She could see it from where she stood, a fine tremor running through him, the kind that comes not from anger, but from holding something enormous very still for a very long time. "You don't know anything about me," the girl whispered. "No," Draco agreed. "And you don't know anything about me. But you said your piece anyway. That's the privilege, isn't it? That's what the list buys you, the right to be known by everyone and understood by no one." He reached for his coat. "I'm done. Tell Fenwick I withdraw. The pan was right about me from the start, and so were all of you, and I'm tired of being the one in the room who has to pretend that's a surprise." He was at the door. His hand was on the cold iron of it, and Hermione, who had spent the whole exchange with a raw building behind her ribs, found that the raw was not aimed where she expected. "Don't you dare," she said. He stopped, did not turn. "Don't you dare walk out of here and let her be right." She crossed the kitchen, fast, the firelight wheeling on the walls, and she did not lower her voice, and she did not care that 4 other people were watching, and Fenwick least of all. "You think she won? You think the pan won? You walk out that door and every single one of them gets to keep the version of you that's easy, the one on the list, the one they don't have to think about." She was close now, close enough to see the wet shine at the rims of his eyes that he was furiously refusing to let fall. "I have spent 2 weeks watching you tell the truth in this room. Ugly truth. True truth. The kind I couldn't manage about myself until you dragged it out of me at a candle. And don't think I've forgiven you for that, by the way. You don't get to do that to me and then run the first time someone hands you the lie you've been carrying like it's a comfort. Granger, I'm not finished." Her own eyes were stinging now, and she let them, because if she could survive him seeing her cry at a window, then he could survive this. "You said your wanting isn't real enough to bury. You said that to me like it was a fact. It isn't a fact. I've watched you feed that fire for an hour like it mattered. I've watched you stand a careful hand's width away from a crying woman because you thought touching her would frighten her. And you were right. And you knew you were right. And you knew it because you actually paid attention to what someone other than yourself needed, which is not a thing a person with no real wanting can do. The words were coming out of her now faster than her columns could vet them, and she let them. She let them. So, don't tell me you have nothing the pan could love. I'm not the pan, and I've found 3 things in the last fortnight, and I wasn't even looking. The silence after that was enormous. Draco turned around. The firelight ran down the side of his face and caught, finally, the tear that had escaped despite everything, a single bright track silver in the orange light, and he did not wipe it away. And that, the not wiping, undid her more than anything he could have said. 3 things, he repeated. His voice had gone to nothing. You've been keeping a column. I keep a column on everything, she said. It's a cage, I'm told. A sound came out of him that was almost terribly a laugh, wet and broken and astonished. What are they? He said. Your 3 things. I'm not telling you in front of an audience, she said. And I'm certainly not telling you while you've got your hand on the door. He looked at his hand on the iron latch as though he'd forgotten it was there. Slowly, he let it go. Sit down, Hermione said, gentler now, the roar draining out of her, leaving something shakier and warmer in its place. Finish the braise. It's burned. It doesn't matter. Finish it anyway. You don't walk out of a room because someone tried to make you small. You stay, and you take up exactly as much space as you're entitled to, and you let them watch you do it. She glanced once at the girl, who had gone scarlet and silent. All of them. Fenwick, by the far hearth, made a small sound. It might have been approval. It might have been the soup taking offence at being ignored. She turned back to her own pot without a word, and one by one the others followed, and the dreadful frozen attention of the room dissolved back into the clatter of a working kitchen, and Draco Malfoy walked back to his ruined braise and his cold pan and his place at Hermione's shoulder, and he picked up the wooden spoon, and his hand was no longer shaking. They cooked in silence for a long time. The braise was beyond saving. Bitter, scorched, a black ruin in the bottom of the pan. But he tended it anyway, stirring the inedible mess with a grave attention that made her chest ache. And she stood beside him and let the silence hold what neither of them had the courage to say aloud. When the wall sconces had burned low and the others had drifted out into the black October night, when it was only the 2 of them and Fenwick pretending not to watch from the shadows of her own hearth, Draco set down the spoon. The pan was cold under his hand, as cold as it had ever been, but he was holding it. He had not let go all night. You said you weren't even looking, he said quietly, not turning from the dead fire. For your 3 things, you said you found them without looking. I did. Then look now. His voice was so low she had to lean toward him to catch it, and leaning toward him, she caught the smell of wood smoke in his hair and the clean, cold mineral smell underneath that she had stopped somewhere in the last fortnight, being able to pretend she didn't notice. Look now, on purpose, and tell me there's nothing in here worth a pan's good opinion. Tell me, and I'll believe you, because you're the only person whose verdict I've ever... He stopped himself. His jaw worked. The firelight died another degree. And Hermione, standing close enough now that the cold of him and the warmth of her had begun that old impossible argument across the half-inch of dark air between them, found that she could not, in fact, tell him there was nothing, and that the pan beneath his hand, which had been cold all night, which had been cold every night, had gone, very faintly, very slightly, in the low red dying light of the last sconce, warm. Neither of them spoke of the warmth. To speak of it would be to frighten it off, the way you don't name a wild thing that has come, against all sense, to eat from your open hand. But they both knew. She had felt it through the half-inch of dark air. He had felt it through his own cold palm, a single degree of something that was not hate. And they had stood there in the dying sconce light, not breathing, until Fenwick had cleared her throat from the shadows, and the moment had broken like a held note, finally let go. So they came back. Not in the mornings now, with the grey light and the system and the oxblood notebook, but at night, after the others had gone, when the kitchen was a black mirror and 100 reflected flames, and the storm smell thick in the dark. It had become, without either of them proposing it, a thing they did. She told herself it was the only time the pan ran warm. That was even partly true. It hates an audience, she said, the third such night, lighting the hearth with her flat palm, because it pleased her now to do the thing he could not, and to do it gently, without triumph. So do you. So do I, if I'm honest. We're all of us at our worst when we're being watched, performing the version of ourselves we think is wanted. She lifted the pan down and it warmed for her, rosy and content. In the day, there are 5 people in here keeping score. At night, it's only us, and there's no one left to perform for. And that's when you stop holding the fear so tight you crush it into the metal. She held the copper out, level, both hands on the bowl. Hold it with me, like the first morning, but this time don't think about the pan at all. What do I think about then? Anything, she said. Anything true. The pan doesn't care what it is, only that it's real. Think about something you wanted and didn't get, something you lost, something you... She stopped, because the next word was love, and she was not ready to say that word in this dark to this person. Something that mattered. Just hold the matter of it, and hold the pan, and let it feel that there's a person in here, and not just a name off a list. He laid his hands over hers on the warm copper. This time she did not watch the pan. She watched his face. The black window threw the candle fire across it, and she saw him go somewhere far back and old and bruised, and she saw the precise instant the mask came off, not torn off, not argued off, just set down, the way you set down a heavy thing when your arms finally give out, and his face without it was so young and so tired and so unguarded that her breath snagged in her throat. The pan stayed warm. 5 seconds. 10. The rosy gleam held steady under their stacked hands and did not drain, did not dim, did not recoil. It's holding, she whispered. Don't. Keep thinking. Don't come back yet. Stay where you are. I'm thinking about the manor, he said, very low, his eyes unfocused, looking through her at something 20 years deep. When I was small, before, my mother used to take me down to the kitchens at night when I couldn't sleep, which was always. I never slept, I was a wretched, frightened child, and the house elves would be horrified, a Malfoy in the kitchen. But she didn't care. She'd sit me on the great scrubbed table and warm milk over the fire in a pan not so different from this one, and she'd... His voice thickened. The pan stayed warm. She'd hum. She wasn't supposed to. Malfoys don't hum. But in the dark, in the kitchen, when it was only us, she'd hum some little tune with no name, and she'd watch the milk, and she'd... He stopped. A muscle in his throat moved. I haven't thought about that in years. I made myself not. It seemed safer not to remember there'd ever been a kitchen where I was warm and someone was glad of me. The copper under their hands was hot now, not scorching, glad, the way it ran for her. The exact rosy, contented warmth it gave Hermione Granger every single morning, and it was giving it, now, to him. Hermione looked down at their hands, and her eyes were swimming. "Malfoy," she breathed. "Look, look." He looked, and she watched the realization break across his face. The warmth, the unmistakable living warmth of the proudest, most unforgiving thing in the kitchen, running freely up through the metal into his own cold hands. And his face did something she had never seen it do, not in 7 years, not ever. It broke open into something raw and astonished, and almost unbearably young, the look of a man who has been told his whole life that he is unlovable and has just felt, against his palm, the first evidence to the contrary. "It's warm," he said stupidly. "Granger, it's warm." And then it ended. Because he was so glad, so undefended, so wholly there in the gladness, that he forgot himself entirely and turned the gladness on her, looked up from the pan straight into her face with all his armor on the floor. And the look went through her like the storm smell made flesh, like ozone, like the air after a hex, and her hands jerked on the copper and his jerked on hers, and the spell of stillness shattered, and the pan, feeling the sudden wild scramble of two hearts, going at once in two different directions, gave one offended shudder and twisted out from under all four of their hands and clattered ringing to the flags. But it did not roll to her feet this time. It came to rest exactly between them, warm on both sides. They stood with their hands hanging, joined in the air over nothing. Again, the way they had that first grey morning, except that nothing about it was the way it had been that first grey morning, because the half-inch of dark between his chest and her shoulder had become the only thing in the world, and neither of them had stepped back, and his hands were still curved around hers, as if they had forgotten they were no longer holding anything but each other. "It worked," Hermione said. Her voice came out at almost nothing. "You did it. You... That's the examination, Malfoy. That's the whole thing. You made it warm. You could pass tomorrow." "I know," he said. He did not move his hands. "You don't have to come back anymore. After tonight, there's no reason. You've done it." "I know," he said again, softer, and his thumb moved, just barely, just once, across the back of her hand, over the small bones of it, a single slow stroke that lit a static down the whole length of her arm and stopped her heart entirely. "That's rather the trouble, isn't it?" The candle on the mantel had bent itself nearly flat toward the two of them. The black window held their reflection, a single dark shape divided by a thread of light, and the storm smell was everywhere. And Hermione understood that the moment had arrived, the one she had been building columns against for a fortnight, the one with no rule and no solution and no method she could write in oxblood ink, that he was going to kiss her, or she was going to kiss him, that one of them was about to step across the half-inch and the other was not going to step back, and her whole clever architecture was about to come down at last. And then Draco Malfoy did the thing she had not braced for, because she had braced for everything except this. He let go. He drew his hands back from hers, slowly, deliberately, and he stepped away. 1 step, 2, the cold air rushing in to fill the place where his warmth had been. And the look on his face had changed, the rawness icing over, the mask scrabbling up off the floor to fix itself, crooked and frightened back across his features. "You should go home, Granger," he said, and his voice had gone formal and far away, the voice of the boy off the list, the boy who knew exactly what he was worth and had decided it was nothing. "It's late. You've done what you came to do. I can manage the examination on my own from here. You said it yourself. There's no reason to come back." He turned away toward the dead black window, toward his own divided reflection. "Thank you for the help. I mean that. But you ought to go." She stood in the rushing cold with her hands still half raised and the warm pan gleaming on the flags between them and the candle burning flat and wild toward a man who had just felt the first warmth of his life and was, she understood with a slow horror, choosing the cold on purpose, choosing it because the warmth had come too close, because being wanted was a country he had no map for, because it was safer, always, to be the villain off the list than to risk being a person someone might actually... "Malfoy," she said. "Good night, Granger." He did not turn around, and the candle, as if it could not bear to watch, guttered all at once down to a single thread of blue, and in the sudden near dark she could see only the pale shape of his back at the black window, rigid and unmoving, refusing her, and the warm copper pan at her feet beginning, degree by degree, in the cold he had chosen, to go dim. She did not go home. She stood in the dying candlelight long enough to understand that he meant it, that the rigid, pale shape of his back at the black window was not going to soften, that he had pulled the cold around himself like a cloak and tied it at the throat. And then she picked up the warm pan from the flags because she could not bear to leave it dimming on the cold stone, and she hung it on its hook, and she said to his back, in a voice steadier than she felt, "All right, I'll go. But you're a coward, Malfoy, and not the kind you confessed to being earlier. A different kind. The kind who runs from the good thing because he's only ever rehearsed the bad one." And she left. She told herself all the way home through the black, wet October that she was finished, that she'd done what she came to do, exactly as he'd said, that she would not go back. She went back. Of course she went back, but in the daylight now, with the others, the safe scheduled mornings, and she did not look at him, and he did not look at her, and the kitchen, which felt everything, knew. The candle on the mantel no longer leaned. The knives sank flat, and the copper pan, when she lifted it down for the day's lesson, came to her hand warm as ever. But it was a thinner warmth, a worried warmth, the warmth of a thing that has felt the temperature of the room change and does not understand why. Because here was the thing she had not predicted, the variable her columns had never accounted for. She had cracked herself open in this kitchen. She had put a column down. She had let herself be seen, and the seeing had been him. And now that he had stepped back into the cold, the crack did not close again. It stayed open, raw to the air, and everything got in. "You're holding it wrong," Fenwick said to her on the fourth such morning, materializing at her shoulder with the suddenness of weather. The old woman's kettle-green eyes were not unkind. "Your hands are right. Your hands are always right. But you're holding it from somewhere closed off, child, and it can feel the door you've shut. You opened something in here, and then you slammed it. The pan misses what was behind it." "I didn't slam anything," Hermione said. "He did." "Ah." Fenwick looked very deliberately across the kitchen to where Draco stood over his own cold hearth, alone, his shoulders a careful architecture of not looking back. "And so you decided to keep things even, to close yourself as tightly as he's closed himself, so that neither of you would be the more wounded, so that the books would balance." She made a soft sound through her teeth. "You clever, frightened girl. You can't outbalance a feeling. You can only feel it or starve it, and starving it doesn't keep the books even. It just leaves you both hungry." She took the pan from Hermione's hands, and in her old flowery grip, it warmed to full rosy gladness at once. Content, unworried, home. "There. You see? It's not your skill that's gone. It's your willingness. Get that back, or the examination will fail you too, and then where will you be? The cleverest witch of the age, undone by a frying pan, the same as him." She pressed the warm copper back into Hermione's hands and added, lower, so only she could hear, "He didn't step back because he stopped wanting you, child. He stepped back because he started. There's a difference, and you of all people ought to be able to tell them apart." It came to a head on the night Fenwick set them the eve of examination trial. Each pair to cook, together, one true dish in their pan, the last rehearsal before the midwinter test. The kitchen at night again, the black mirror window, the 100 reflected flames, and no escaping it now. They had to stand at the same hearth, hold the same pan, make the same dish, and the air between them was so thick with everything unsaid that Hermione could feel it as a physical pressure against her face, a static, the storm smell sharpened to a blade. He took the pan first. It went cold for him, colder than it had been in weeks, because he too had slammed his door, had spent a fortnight rehearsing the cold on purpose, and the onions seized and stuck, and his knuckles whitened, and Hermione watched him stand there choosing the failure, preferring it, and something in her that had been balancing the books for 2 weeks finally, cleanly, snapped. "Stop it," she said. "I'm trying to caramelize an onion, Granger. I don't know what you imagine I'm." "You're not trying. You're proving. You're standing there, holding it cold, so you can show me you were right to step back. So the books balance. So you get to keep being the villain off the list, because the villain off the list never has to risk anything." She came around the hearth, and the firelight wheeled, and she did not lower her voice, though Fenwick was somewhere in the shadows pretending to scour a pot. "It went warm for you. I felt it go warm. You did the impossible thing in this room, and the second it happened, you put it down and ran, and then you let me believe I'd slammed a door. When it was you, it was always you. You slammed it because the warm thing frightened you more than every cold thing in your whole cold life put together. Yes, he said. It stopped her. She had built up a whole roaring momentum, and he took it out from under her with one flat word. Yes, he said again, and turned to face her, and the mask was not on. He had not had time to fix it, or he had stopped bothering, and his face in the firelight was bare and exhausted and furious, not at her, she saw, at himself. Yes, it frightened me. Is that the confession you came for? It went warm, and I felt, for 1 second, I felt what it must be like to be you, to walk into a room and have it be glad, and I could not bear it because I knew it would be taken away. Everything warm is taken away. That's not self-pity, Granger. Don't look at me like it's self-pity. It's arithmetic. I have a great deal of evidence. His voice cracked down the middle. So, yes, I stepped back. Because if I was the one who ended it, then at least I ended it. At least it was mine to end. At least I didn't have to stand there and wait for you to look at the list and remember what I am and take the warmth away yourself. I did it first. It's the only thing I know how to do. Strike before you're struck. My father taught me that before I could read. The kitchen had gone utterly silent. Even Fenwick had stopped pretending to scour. "You absolute fool," Hermione said, and her voice broke too, and she did not care. "You think I'd have taken it away? Everyone? I'm not everyone. I'm the one who came back. In the daylight, every single morning, when it cost me everything to look at the back of your stupid head and not say what I—" She stopped. Her hands had come up to straighten her sleeve cuff, frantic, the old tell. And she caught herself doing it and forced her hands back down to her sides, made them stay there, made herself stand in front of him with nothing to fidget with and nothing to hide behind, exposed as a nerve, the way he had taught her without meaning to. "You asked me once what my 3 things were, the 3 things I found in you without looking. Do you still want them?" He went very still. The firelight ran down the side of his face. "Granger." 1. She took a step toward him. "You paid attention. To me, when I was coming apart at a window, you noticed exactly how close you could stand without frightening me. And you stood there, and you said the kindest thing anyone said to me since the war, and you didn't even seem to know you'd done something rare." Another step, the 1/2 inch of dark beginning, again to be the only thing in the world. 2. You came back, every morning to a room that hated you, to hold a thing that burned you, and you never once let go of it. Not when the girl said what she said, not ever. And a man with no real wanting doesn't keep coming back to be burned. A 3rd step, and now there was no 1/2 inch. Now there was only the warmth of him meeting the warmth of her in the cold air and refusing, at last, to argue. 3. "Don't," he said, but it was not the formal, faraway don't of the night he'd stepped back. It was a different word entirely. It was a word with his whole heart in it, terrified, hoping. "Don't, if you don't mean it. I can survive a great many things, Granger, but I don't think I can survive you saying the 3rd one and not meaning it." 3, she said, looking up into his bare, astonished face, her own heart going like a struck bell. "I stopped being able to pretend I came to this kitchen for any reason that wasn't, eventually, you." The candle on the mantel flared white. The black window held them, 2 dark shapes that were no longer divided by any thread of light at all. and Draco Malfoy lifted one hand, slowly, the way you reach for a wild thing that has come against all sense to your open palm, and laid it against the side of her face, his cold fingers and her warm cheek, beginning that old impossible argument, and, this time, settling it. And Hermione closed her eyes and turned her face into his hand, and the pan on the cold hearth beside them, untouched, unbidden, with no one holding it at all, began very quietly and entirely on its own to glow. His hand was against her face, and the pan was glowing on the cold hearth with no one touching it, and the whole charged dark of the kitchen had narrowed to the single point where his cold fingers met her warm cheek. And then a pot lid, somewhere in the shadows, clattered to the stone floor with a sound like a dropped portcullis, and they sprang apart. Fenwick, standing by her own hearth with a copper lid at her feet and an expression of vast, theatrical innocence. "Don't mind me," she said. "I drop things. Old hands." But her kettle-green eyes were bright with something that was not quite a smile, and she bent with a creak to retrieve the lid and added conversationally to the room at large, "The examination is in 3 days. Whatever the two of you are doing, you'll want to be quite sure of it by then. The pan can't be fooled, you'll recall. Not about cookery and not about anything else. It will know exactly what you are to each other when you hold it together. So," she hung the lid back on its hook, "be sure." And she shuffled off into the dark of her own quarters, leaving them standing 3 feet apart in the firelight, with the glowing pan between them and the entire unspoken weight of what had almost happened. What had, in fact, begun to happen, his hand on her face, her cheek turned into his palm, hanging in the air like the storm smell after a hex. Hermione's hand had gone, traitorously, to straighten her sleeve cuff. She stopped it. "Well," she said. Her voice was not steady, and she did not try to make it so. She has appalling timing." "She has perfect timing," Draco said. He was looking at the glowing pan, not at her, and the firelight caught the tremor still running through him, the fine, deep tremor of a man holding something enormous, very still. "She stopped me before He swallowed. "Before I did the thing I've wanted to do since the morning you put your hands over mine and made me hold the fear. Which would have been a catastrophe, because I'd have done it badly and frightened you and proven myself right about everything I've spent 2 weeks being right about." He finally looked at her, and his eyes were wet and furious and hoping all at once. "I don't know how to do this, Granger. Whatever this is, I know how to be hated. I'm fluent in it. I have never once in my life known how to be," the word stuck, "wanted by someone whose wanting I trusted. I don't have the columns for it. I don't have anything for it." "Neither do I," she said, and the admission cost her, and she let him see that it cost her. "I have columns for everything, and not one of them is any use here. I came to this kitchen because it was the one place being clever couldn't save me. And now look. I'm standing in it terrified, with no system, holding nothing, and the only thing I'm sure of is that when you stepped back 2 weeks ago, it hurt more than the war did, in its way, because the war was a thing that happened to me, and this was a thing I chose, and I'd never chosen anything like this before, and I didn't know I could be that open to being hurt by one person walking away from a window." She drew a breath. The candle leaned toward her. "So no, I don't have anything for it either. I think that might be the point. I think you can't have a column for this. I think you just have to be in it without the column, which is the most frightening thing I've ever heard of, and I once stood in front of Bellatrix Lestrange. He made a sound, wet and astonished. There was almost a laugh. You're comparing me to Bellatrix. I'm comparing this feeling to Bellatrix. You're a great deal worse. She only had a knife. And he did laugh then, really laugh, helpless and broken and bright, the first true laugh she had ever heard from him, and it transformed his whole face, took 10 years, and one wore off it, and she stood in the firelight watching him laugh, and felt the last of her architecture come down soft and complete, like snow. They walked out into the night together. It was the first time they had ever simply walked anywhere together, side by side, with nowhere they had to be, and no pan between them, and the strangeness of it sat between them like a third presence, pleasant, terrifying, new. The October cold had teeth. The stars were out hard and clean above the black hills, and their breath smoked. And at the gate where the path forked, hers one way and his another, they stopped, and the stopping was unbearable. I should, she began. Yes, he said, you should. Neither of them moved. The static gathered. The half-inch of cold night air between his shoulder and hers became, again, the only thing in the world. Granger, Hermione. He had never once used her name, she realized. In 7 years, never once. And the sound of it in his mouth, low and careful, like a word in a language he was just learning to speak, undid something in her chest entirely. If I kiss you at this gate, in the dark, with no Pan to blame it on, and no Fenwick to interrupt, and nothing between us but the fact that I want to, will you let me? Or will you, very sensibly, remember exactly who I am, and step back and save us both? She looked at him in the starlight, the bare hope on his face, the terror under it, the list he carried, that he thought she could read in him the way the cookware did, the list that said unlovable, unwanted, strike before you're struck. Ask me again at the examination, she said. His face fell, just a flicker, the old arithmetic, of course. Of course, she stepped back. Everyone steps back. And she caught it, and she reached up and took the front of his cold coat in both her fists, the way you'd grab someone to keep them from falling. And she said, fierce and quiet, before the arithmetic could finish, not because I'm saving us. Don't you dare do the sum. Because I want it to count, Malfoy. I want it to happen in the room where neither of us can lie. I want the Pan to feel it and warm and tell us both it's real, because you won't believe it's real until something that can't be fooled tells you so. And frankly, neither will I. I've spent 2 weeks deciding I'd imagined the whole thing. So, 3 days. Hold the Pan with me in front of Fenwick and the whole class, and make it warm, make it glow, and the second it does, I will kiss you in front of every single one of them, and the list can go hang. Her grip tightened on his coat. That's not me stepping back. That's me asking you to earn it, the only way that'll let you believe it. Do you understand the difference? He stared down at her fists knotted in his coat, at her face turned up to his in the hard, clean starlight, and something moved across his features that she had not seen before. Not hope. Hope was too small a word. Something larger and more dangerous. Something that looked like a man deciding, after a lifetime of evidence to the contrary, to believe in one warm thing. "You're going to make me cook," he said unsteadily, "to be allowed to kiss you. I'm going to make you cook one true thing in front of witnesses," she said, "to prove to the most frightened person I've ever met that he's worth warming for. Yes, those are my terms. Take them or—" He took them. Not with a kiss. He kept to her terms. He held the line. And that holding, that too-weak coward suddenly finding the discipline to wait because she'd asked him to, told her more about what she meant to him than any kiss could have. He took her 2 fists in his 2 cold hands, gently, and unwound them from his coat, and he raised them, both of them, together, and pressed his mouth to her knuckles, once, the cold of his lips and the warmth of her skin beginning that old argument, and, for the length of a held breath, suspending it, neither winning, both simply true. And then he let her hands go and stepped back deliberately, the right kind of step back this time, the kind that was a promise and not a flight. 3 days, he said. His voice had gone rough. "I'll make it glow, Granger. I'll make it sing. I'll make that wretched pan compose poetry if it gets me the right to do this properly." He was already walking backward up his fork of the path, into the dark, his eyes not leaving her face. "And then, I'm going to kiss you in front of Fenwick, and the whole class, and the list, and the entire enchanted county, and you are not going to be able to file it in a single column, and I am going to enjoy that more than is probably decent." 3 days, she agreed, and her voice came out at almost nothing, and her knuckles burned where his mouth had been, the imprint of it bright and impossible in the cold. He turned and walked off into the night, and she stood at the gate watching the pale shape of him diminish against the dark hills, her hands pressed to her own chest, her heart going like a struck bell, and high above them both, in the black window of Fenwick's kitchen, lit by no candle and held by no hand, the copper pan glowed on alone in the dark, a small steady warmth burning all by itself through the whole cold star-pierced night, as though it could not bear to wait 3 days either. The 3 days were the longest of her life, and she had once spent a year in a tent. She did not sleep well. She lay in the dark and tried to file the thing that had happened at the gate into a column, and could not. There was no column for the imprint of a man's mouth on your knuckles, no system for the way her own heart had gone treacherous and bright, no rule that governed the slow, certain capsize of 2 years of careful architecture. So she gave up filing it. She lay in the dark and simply felt it, the way he'd taught her to feel things, and the feeling was so large and so unfamiliar that twice she got up and lit a candle just to watch a small tame flame and remind herself that warmth was a thing that existed and could be born. She wondered, those 3 nights, whether he was lying awake too. She decided he was. She was right. Midwinter came grey and bitter, the shortest day, the sky the colour of a cold hearth. By the time she reached Fenwick's, the light was already failing, though it was barely past noon, and the kitchen blazed against the early dark. Every wall sconce lit, the great central hearth roaring, the 100 copper pans throwing back the firelight, so that the whole room seemed lined with banked embers. The storm smell was thick enough to taste. The air pressed against her face. Examination day, and the kitchen knew it, and the kitchen was excited. The way a thing is excited when it is about to learn the truth about someone it has been wondering about for a long time. The 5 remaining students stood at their stations. Fenwick moved among them in a clean apron, her silver hair caught up, her kettle-green eyes bright and merciless. "One dish," she said, "in your pan, together, in your pairs. The dish does not matter. The pan does not care if it is humble or grand. It cares only that it is true, that you cook it meaning it, with your whole heart in your horns, and that you have earned the right to be held by it. Those who pass will know. Those who fail will know sooner. Begin when you're ready. I'll come round." She did not begin with them. She saved them for last. Of course she did. Hermione stood at their station and did not look at Draco, and was aware of nothing but Draco. He had come dressed plainly, no expensive coat, his sleeves already pushed up. Both of them, she noticed, the left one too, the dark mark bare to the firelight, no longer hidden, and the small fact of that, the not hiding, made her chest ache before they had cooked a single thing. "What do we make?" she said quietly. "Warm milk," he said. She looked at him then. He was looking at the pan on its hook, and his jaw was tight, and his eyes were bright. "The pan my mother used wasn't so different from this one," he said. "I told you that. The night it first went warm for me, I was thinking about her humming in the manor kitchen, warming milk over the fire, glad of me when no one else in that whole cold house was glad of anything." He swallowed. "I haven't made it since. I told myself I'd forgotten how. I hadn't. You don't forget the first warm thing." He finally looked at her, and his bare face in the firelight was terrified and certain at once. "So, warm milk. With honey and a little cinnamon, the way she did it. The humblest thing in the world. If the pan won't warm for that, it won't warm for anything, and I'd rather know." "All right," she said softly. "Warm milk." And then, because she could not help it, because 2 years of saying the careful thing had to end somewhere. "Your mother would be glad of you now, Malfoy. I think she'd be glad of you exactly as you are, standing in a kitchen that hated you, holding a thing that burned you, refusing to let go. I think that's a son to be glad of." His breath went ragged. For a moment she thought she'd undone him before they'd begun. Then he gathered himself and nodded once, and reached up and took the pan down from its hook. It went cold in his hand. She saw the cold come down, the familiar dropped portcullis chill, and she saw his knuckles whiten, and she saw this was the thing. This was the whole 2 weeks made flesh. She saw him not perform. He did not square his shoulders against the cold. He did not arrange his face. He simply stood there, holding the cold pan with his bare arm, and his bare mark, and his bare frightened hope showing, and he did not pretend the cold didn't hurt, and he did not pretend he wasn't afraid, and he did not strike first. "Hold it with me," Hermione said, and laid her hands over his. The warmth from her hands met the cold of the metal, and the two could not reconcile, that old tactile friction running up through both their wrists, and for a moment nothing happened. The pan caught between her gladness and his fear, trembling on the knife edge of its verdict, and across the kitchen Fenwick turned from the Hufflepuff's perfectly adequate soup to watch, kettle-green eyes narrowing, and the whole room seemed to lean in, the sconces guttering, the storm smell sharpening to ozone. "Don't think about the pan," Hermione said, low, just for him. "Don't think about passing. Don't think about the examination or the list or me or any of it. Think about her. Think about the milk. Think about being small and frightened in a great cold house and someone warming a little pan over a fire and humming a tune with no name because she was glad of you. Hold that. Hold only that." She watched his face go far away. She watched the mask, what little of it was left, set itself down gently the last time, for good. And she watched his lips move, soundless, and realized with a catch in her throat that he was humming, almost too quiet to hear. Some little tune with no name, dredged up from 20 years deep, the tune his mother had hummed over a pan, not so different from this one, in the dark, when it was only them and the fire and the warmth. The cold pan began to warm. Slowly at first, then all at once, the chill draining out of the copper and the rosy gladness flooding up through the metal into both their stacked hands. And the milk Hermione poured in did not scorch, did not seize, but went gold and fragrant at the edges. And the honey she added swirled and dissolved, and the cinnamon bloomed its dark, sweet smell into the firelit air. And the pan was warm. The pan was glowing. The pan was singing, a low, contented hum of its own, harmonizing impossibly with the tune coming soundless off Draco Malfoy's lips. Someone in the room gasped. The year below girl, perhaps. It didn't matter. "It's warm," Draco said, and his voice broke clean in half. "Granger, feel it, I feel it," she whispered. Her hands were over his, and the warmth was running through all four of their hands at once, and her eyes were streaming, and she did not care. "You did it. You did it. That's a true thing, the truest thing in the room." And Fenwick's voice, from very close, made them both startle. Yes. The old woman had come to stand at their shoulders, and she was looking down at the glowing pan, at the gold milk, at the two pairs of hands wrapped warm around the handle, and her merciless kettle-green eyes had gone, astonishingly, wet. "Yes, there it is, the proudest thing in my kitchen, and it's purring like a kitchen cat for the boy off the list." She reached out one floury finger and touched the warm copper, and the pan warmed further still, gladly, for all three of them. "I have run this kitchen for 40 years, Mr. Malfoy. I have seen perhaps 4 people the pan loved as it loves Miss Granger. I have never, not once, seen it learn to love someone who began the way you began, cold to the bone. The kitchen wrote you off the first hour. So did you. So, I'd wager, did most of England." She took her finger away. "And here you stand, holding it warm, having taught a thing that cannot be fooled to be glad of you. Do you understand what that means? It means the thing it could not be fooled about, the thing it read in you cold all those weeks, has changed. Not been hidden, not been performed, changed. You are not the man who walked through my door. The pan would know if you were faking it. It is not faking it. Neither, child, are you." She stepped back. She raised her voice to the whole watching room. "Mr. Malfoy passes, with honours which I do not award lightly and have not awarded in 9 years." A pause, and the ghost of that not quite smile. "The rest of you, finish your soup. The show is not over, I think, but the cooking part of it is." And she folded her hands into her apron and waited, and the whole class waited, and the firelight roared, and Draco Malfoy turned from the glowing pan to Hermione Granger with his bare face and his bare arm and his whole bare unguarded heart showing. And he said unsteadily in front of Fenwick and the Year Below girls and the Hufflepuff and the old man and the entire enchanted county, "It glowed. I made it glow. So I'm asking you again, Granger, at the examination, the way you wanted it to count." He drew a breath that shook. "May I kiss you?" he finished, and the words came out of him bare and trembling and entirely without armour, the proudest boy in England asking permission in front of witnesses. The list be hanged, the arithmetic be hanged, holding nothing back and nothing in reserve. Hermione did not answer with words. She had said she would file nothing in a column ever again, and she kept the promise. She let go of the warm pan. It stayed glowing, balanced and content on its own warmth. And she took his bare face in both her hands, the way he had taken hers at the gate, her warm palms against his jaw, and she rose up onto her toes in the roaring firelight, and she kissed Draco Malfoy in front of Fenwick, and the Year Below girls, and the Hufflepuff, and the old man, and the whole watching enchanted kitchen. And the kiss was not careful, and it was not clever, and it had no system to it at all. His cold lips met her warm mouth, and the two could not reconcile, and then, all at once, did. The old, impossible argument settled at last, neither winning, both simply true, both simply warm. And she felt the shock of it run through his whole body, the disbelief, and then the surrender, the precise instant he stopped bracing for the warmth to be taken away and let himself believe, for the first time in his life, that it might be allowed to stay. His hands came up to her waist, hesitant, then sure, and he kissed her back like a man who had been cold his entire life, walking at last into a warm room and finding the door would not close behind him. The kitchen went mad with joy. Every sconce on the wall flared white. The copper pans on their hooks rang out all at once, 100 bright bell notes harmonizing into something almost like a chord, almost like a chorus. The knives in the block sang their highest dawn song, though it was nearly night. The great hearth roared up gold, and threw their joined shadow enormous across the stone, two dark shapes that were no longer divided by any thread of light at all, but folded into one. And on the mantel, the little tin bell, which no one had touched, rang and rang and rang of its own accord, wild and glad, while the candle beside it burned a clean white column straight to the blackened beams. Somewhere very far away, she heard the Year Below girls shriek with laughter and delight. She heard the Hufflepuff soup, neglected, begin to weep with what was unmistakably happiness. She heard Fenwick, Master Eulalie. Fenwick, 40 years in this kitchen, merciless judge of hearts, make a sound that was half a cackle and half something suspiciously close to a sob, and say to no one, to the room, to the whole enchanted, blazing midwinter dark, "Oh, finally, I thought I'd die before the pair of you managed it." And the pan, the proudest thing in the kitchen, older than Fenwick, never once fooled, glowed on the hearth beside them with the warm gold milk steaming in its belly, and burned brighter and brighter with a gladness so fierce it lit the undersides of their faces as they finally, slowly broke apart. Draco's eyes were wet. He did not bother to hide it. His forehead came to rest against hers, and his cold breath and her warm breath mingled in the small space between them, and for a long moment neither of them spoke, because there was nothing in any language that would have fit. "You meant it," he said at last, wondering, his voice cracked all the way through. "You actually, in front of everyone, you meant it." "I'm the cleverest witch of my age," Hermione said unsteadily, her thumbs stroking his jaw. "And I have just kissed Draco Malfoy in a room full of witnesses with a frying pan as my chaperone. I assure you, I did not do it by accident." A laugh broke out of him, wet and astonished and helpless, the second true laugh she had ever heard from him, and she resolved on the spot to spend a great deal of time collecting the rest. "The pan as chaperone," he repeated. "God help us. It'll tell Fenwick everything." He pulled back just far enough to look at her, and the bare wonder on his face shifted into something graver, something that frightened her with its honesty. "Granger, Hermione, I told you I don't have the columns for this, for being wanted. I still don't. I'm going to do it badly. I'm going to flinch when you're kind to me, and I'm going to wait for you to read the list. And remember, because that's 20 years of arithmetic, and it doesn't unlearn in a fortnight." His hands tightened on her waist. "I need you to know that, going in. I'm not the warm thing. I'm the cold thing that learned, in this one kitchen, with this one impossible pan, and this one impossible witch, that it could be warm if it tried hard enough. I'll have to keep trying. Every day. It won't be easy the way it's easy for you." "It's not easy for me either," she said. "I came here coming apart. You're the one who noticed. You're the one who told me I could put one column down, that it was safe in here to put one down, that that's what the room was for." She took his hands from her waist and held them between hers, his cold fingers and her warm ones, the argument that had stopped being an argument. "So, we'll be bad at it together. I'll flinch when you wait for me to leave, and you'll flinch when I reach for a system instead of for you, and we'll be two frightened people who learn to feel in a kitchen run by a madwoman, doing it badly, every day, on purpose." Her voice steadied. "I don't want easy, Malfoy. I had easy once, with someone safe, and it bored me half to death. I want the thing that's worth being frightened of. I want the warm thing that I had to earn. I want you to make the pan glow for the rest of our lives, and I want to be there every single time it does." He looked at her, as though she had handed him something he had spent his whole life being told he was not permitted to hold. "The rest of our lives," he said, very quietly. "You're filing rather a long column, Granger." "I told you," she said. "I've stopped filing. I'm just in it now, without the column." And she smiled at him, the warm, fierce, certain smile that the kitchen had loved from the first hour, and turned it on him, full force, and watched it land. "Be in it with me. That's the only system I've got left." Fenwick made them stay for supper. She made all 5 of them stay, declared the examinations concluded, the course complete, and the proper end to any cooking course, a meal eaten together at the great scrubbed oak table, while the midwinter dark pressed black against the honeyed window and the sconces burned low and gold. The year below girls, who had spent the term terrified of Hermione and contemptuous of Draco, found themselves over warm bread and a soup that had wept itself into something glorious, asking him shyly about the manor kitchen and his mother's tune. And Hermione watched, her chest tight and full, as Draco Malfoy, bare-armed, mark showing, list be hanged, answered them, haltingly at first, and then with growing ease, a person being known by people who had decided to actually look. The warm milk they had cooked sat in its glowing pan in the centre of the table. Fenwick ladled it into 5 cups and 1 for herself, and they drank it, honey and cinnamon, and 20 years of grief turned sweet. And it was, Hermione thought, the best thing she had ever tasted in her life, and she understood at last what the old woman had meant on the very first day. That magic cooked nothing, that feeling cooked, that the truest meals were made in the dark by the hearth, with someone glad of you. When the others had gone, out into the star-pierced midwinter night, full and warm and changed, Fenwick walked the 2 of them to the handleless door with its brass ladle knocker. She pressed into Draco's hands the glowing copper pan wrapped in clean cloth, still warm. "It's yours," she said, before he could protest. It chose. 40 years I've run this kitchen, and it has never once asked to leave with anyone, and tonight it will not stop nudging itself toward you. So, take it. Warm milk for your children when there are children. Hum the tune. You'll find you remember more of it than you think you do. Her kettle-green eyes glittered. And come back, both of you. The kitchen will sulk if you don't, and a sulking kitchen is more than I can manage at my age. She shooed them out into the dark. Go on. Go and be badly, frighteningly, impossibly happy. It's what the whole wretched business is for. The door swung shut behind them on its own, and they stood at the gate where the path forked, except that it did not fork any more. Or rather, it did. But Hermione found she had no intention of taking her own branch of it, and neither, it was plain, did he. The stars were hard and clean above the black hills. Their breath smoked. Draco held the warm pan wrapped against his chest with one arm, and with his free hand he reached for hers, his cold fingers threading through her warm ones, and the contact lit the static all up her arm the way it had the very first morning, except that there was nothing frightening in it now, only the slow, astonished warmth of a thing earned and kept. "Walk you home," he said, or the old flicker of arithmetic, quickly caught, deliberately set aside. Or I could walk you home, and then you could walk me home, and we could simply keep walking each other back and forth across this hill until one of us is brave enough to suggest that perhaps we needn't part at all tonight. "That second one," Hermione said. "Definitely the second one." And she tightened her warm fingers around his cold ones, and she pulled him down to kiss her once more in the starlight, slow and certain, and entirely without a single column to file it in. And against his chest, wrapped in its clean cloth, held by the 2 of them now and forever, the proudest pan in England glowed warm and steady and glad, lighting them both gold all the long walk home through the dark.
Thank you for staying with this story until the end. I want to tell you why I wrote it. I did not write it about magic, not really. I wrote it about fear. The fear of being wanted. That fear is real. A lot of us carry it. Draco was easy to write, not because he is cold, because he is so scared of worms. There is a moment in the story I love. The pen goes warm in his hands for 1 second, and then he lets go. He runs. He chooses to cold on purpose. He does it because worms feels too dangerous. I think Many people will understand that. And Hermione, she hides too. She hides behind being clever. She builds her little columns. She thinks if she is smart enough, she will never have to feel anything. But the kitchen does not care how smart she is. It only cares if she is correct. That is the whole story really. Two scared people, one strange kitchen, and one proud little pen that cannot be fooled. I hope you found something of yourself in them, and I hope if you are holding something warm right now, you do not let go. Thank you. I will see you in the next story.